Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to yet another edition of Doom Mod Madness. This time round, we're checking out a mod by the name of Hedon. This is a total conversion that puts you squarely in the boots of one very angry orc lady, one who's had a bit of a bump on the head and woken up in a seemingly abandoned mine. Now, this opening level is actually pretty subdued. There's not a lot of excessive action to be encountered here. Instead, it functions more as a low-key tutorial, introducing you to various items and mechanics that you'll be taking advantage of during the course of the mod. Another aspect of Hedon that this opening level will introduce to you is the general pace of level exploration here, and that word exploration is very much key. Levels here often splinter into multiple routes, and chances are you'll have to explore a fair few of them before you actually discover the way forward or the vital item that you'll need. This room here, for example, at first I thought was a dead end until I discovered that the jumping mechanic is indeed utilized here, allowing you to scale the sides and ultimately come across a very useful key. I'd certainly say that this isn't a mod for those of you out there with itchy trigger fingers. It's a very slow burn opening, one that involves lots of reading of scrolls and notes, absorbing environmental detail, and just generally drinking in the atmosphere. In fact, it'll probably be a good 10-15 minutes before you even run into your first enemy. Hell, you don't even get your hands on a projectile weapon until you get out of the mines. That is, unless you count the axe as not being a projectile weapon in of itself, considering the alt fire does allow you to sling it across a room and directly into the face of an enemy. Which, you know, is always fun. Doubly so when the enemy explodes into gory chunky pieces. Once you finally get yourself out of the mines, you'll find yourself in a forest infested with dastardly cultists, prime targets for you to test out your spike gun on. And this weapon is fairly effective. The only thing you'll have to watch out for is that the ammunition at this point is in very short supply indeed. Thankfully, if you take out hooded cultists, they will actually drop additional spike ammunition for you, but even then, it's not quite plentiful enough for you to be able to deal with absolutely everything in this particular section of levels, so switching between the spike gun and the axe is certainly the way to go, especially when dealing with these more close-range melee enemies. So once you get past the mines and the forest, Hedon really opens up, introducing you to its second map, the underground Orc Stronghold village, which, you guessed it, has also been overrun by worms and no-shirt-having son-of-a-bitch cultists. Happily, it's also where you're introduced to the frag-fire cannon, which I'm currently wielding here. It's pretty much a shotgun, with the added bonus of also having a flamethrower alt-fire, because who doesn't love a shotgun with a flamethrower strapped to it? And just to demonstrate the effectiveness of the alt-fire, I think I'll unleash it on, this guy. He'll do. Takes him out pretty quick, as you can see by the smouldering pile of ash there, and I find that the alt fire actually affords you a bit more control in how much ammo you expend. The primary fire actually takes up 8 rounds per shot, so you only get 10 per magazine. We've also got time crystals, or time shards as they're described here, which freezes time, allows you to pop off a few shots, maybe spray a little alt fire, and Bob's your uncle. A few dead cultists. Always fun. They are in quite limited supply, however, so it's the kind of thing you might want to save for, let's say, more hefty encounters. As I mentioned earlier, this is where the mod really starts to expand its scope in terms of level design. And as a result, it can often be a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, you've got all of this wonderful exploration to do, all of these orcish shops to poke your nose around and find various items and goodies, but on the other hand, you get lost really goddamn easy. To that end, Hedon does actually offer a fairly decent automap system, one that displays which keys will unlock what doors and where, and one that I believe also allows you to place custom map markers, something that I really recommend taking advantage of. Basically, you're going to be doing a fair amount of backtracking here. This is the kind of level that will have you revisit certain rooms, or at least need you to remember what important items are stored where. And with all these scrolls littered around filling in lots of admittedly really interesting backstory, it can be a little hard to retain all of that vital information. I think a good example of what I'm talking about here would be the quest items that you're asked to gather and then use during the course of this map. The whole conceit being that you need to dispel a lock on a door, and that requires collecting purple roots from all over the place, which is tricky to begin with. You have to poke your nose in a lot of different places, and you got to boil up the roots that you found to make this purple pigment, and then you've got to take it somewhere else. You've got to take it to a completely different cauldron, use a red crystal to make that cauldron hot enough, mix in some fey dust, then take what you've made in that other cauldron to another place to write a spell, and then take to the door to unlock it. Can you see why this gets a little too convoluted for my tastes? It's like a few steps too far. Now don't get me wrong, I think it's a neat idea, I just feel like it could be streamlined a hell of a lot better, because as it is right now, it just stops the level dead in its tracks, and you'll spend a good long while just sitting there thinking, where have I been? Where have I visited? Where do I need to go? Where was that cauldron again? It gets a little tiresome when all you want to be doing is just making some progress. If I had to pick which map out of the ones currently available here in Hedon impressed me the most, I'd have to say that the last one here certainly made the biggest impression. For me, it was the feeling that this particular map took certain elements introduced over the last three and managed to condense it down into something that felt a bit more, well, satisfying. Not to mention with a nice dash of atmospherics at the start as well. It's just not that often that you get a mod that encourages good use of night vision goggles, but Hedon manages it all the same, so I've definitely got to give it props for that. My favourite part of the level by far though has to be the forge itself. Definitely detecting some World of Warcraft influence here. Just a little, just a smidge. It's very subtle. But visuals aside, as nifty as they aren't the main reason why this is a favourite of mine in Hedon. It's actually because the forge equipment here is actually usable. It's not just for show, and it's pretty friggin' neat. In fact, it's the linchpin of the entire level. For starters, you'll have to go and forge your own key, which requires getting some iron ore, smelting it down into an iron ingot, which is a little bar here, and then you can take it to a mold in one of the other rooms just around the corner here, and actually make yourself an iron key. And this is a really neat little microcosm of what the rest of the level's about. So this gives you a taste of how to do the basics, how to make something using the ore and the ingots. And then it presents you with the real aim of the level, which is having you travel down into the mines below the forge, mining your own ore, and bringing it back to make something a little bit more complicated. It makes sense, it fits in a nice little logical niche in my brain, and that's why I prefer this map a heck of a lot more than the map where I had to faff around finding ingredients for a cauldron. It didn't quite link together as elegantly as this. If there's one thing I feel Hedon could stand to seriously benefit from, however, it would be the inclusion of some kind of sub-menu, something that stores all of the scrolls and notes that you've come across during gameplay so far. And the reason why I bring that up is mainly because I'm quite forgetful. In this case, I have to collect 5 pieces of mithril ore from the mines and return them to the big forge up top. Basically, it's the kind of place you don't want to have to visit more than once. I ended up coming down here 3 times. The first time was out of curiosity, and I had an elemental ring, so I thought, screw it, I can walk on lava with this thing, I'm going to abuse it, forgot where the entrance to the actual mine was, and ended up turning around. So I came back later, took the lava damage, and ended up having to fight through all of the goons that infest the place as well, and that's where I forgot how much damn mithril I needed. So yeah, a better way to remind myself of what I'm actually doing, please, because I'm an idiot. Ultimately, Hedon is very promising to me. It's got a lot of elements in here that are pretty damn good. I enjoy the inclusion of quest items, I just feel like the collection of them could be a hell of a lot less obtuse in some cases. The art style of it is pretty damn good. I don't mention art style often, but it's just the right side of cartoonish, as I mentioned in the Forge. It owes a bit of a heavy debt to World of Warcraft, and I suddenly realized that I've not spent much time, if any, talking about how the core combat feels here, well, beyond throwing an axe into an enemy's face, and in all honesty, it's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward, there's nothing here especially out the ordinary. I mean, the time freeze crystal is neat and all, but I've seen that kind of stuff before. The alt fires are nice, and really, the combat here isn't the star of the show for me. I mean, you've got items like stone skin and invisibility and all to aid you in combat, but it's the world that you're exploring, it's the backstory that you're reading in the notes, it's the inventive quests that pepper some of these maps that make Hedon what it is and what it potentially can be. So yeah, I think I'm going to be keeping an eye on this one, see how progress comes along, and I'll be awaiting new maps with bated breath. But yeah, this is only in alpha version 0.4 at time of playing, and as I've probably already mentioned, there are 4 available maps going from Cold Rock to the Plaza to the Barracks and the technical space, which also includes the Forge. And if you want to play around with all of the weapons of Hedon, you can actually obtain them in this opening hub here when you select New Game, and you can just play around with them, see what they do, see what all the alt fires do, but you want to be careful not to bring them with you on the first playthrough, otherwise you will suffer from a very unbalanced situation where you have all of the weapons and everything is a complete pushover. But the Crush Bow here, as you can see, is pretty much the rocket launcher analog. Alt Fire is a more focused blast, doesn't do as much splash damage compared to the primary fire, pretty good for hefty enemies, and this here is the Cry Lance, which I don't think I actually picked up. It's very pew-pew, very laser gunnish. Alt Fire, very fun. Reminds me of a certain weapon from Half-Life 2, you'll know if you've played it. It's just pleasing having bouncing orbs just flinging all over the place. And the last thing we have here is the Potion Launcher, which pretty much fires gas grenades. Primary fire makes them explode on impact, and they're pretty good for crowd control. Secondary just makes them bounce around a bit. Nothing crazy, nothing over the top, and I guess that kind of goes for most of the weapons here in Hedon. There's a distinct lack of bombast in that department, more utilitarian than anything. The right weapon for the right situation kind of thing. There's also all of the inventory items in Hedon available for you here as well, should you choose to play around with them. Things ranging from strength, haste, armor, invisibility, time stop, which you've already seen, and the sentry guns, which I didn't really have much chance to play around with, but I did at least see some of them in action during the technical space map. But I'm hoping future maps provide more excuse for me to lay a few of those down. But there you go, that's pretty much Hedon in its current form, 0.4 alpha to be precise, and I'm pretty intrigued to see where this will go. It's already got a pretty solid foundation. I admit that the pace of it may not be for everyone. Some of the exploration may frustrate more than it entices, but either way, I still think it's more than worthy of a whirl. So if you're interested, the link, as usual, is in the description below. And hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments, and feel free to suggest any mods you'd like to see me cover in future episodes of Doom Mod Madness. I'd also like to say a great big thank you to all of my lovely patrons over on Patreon. Thank you also very much for helping support this channel, and if you're interested in doing the same, the link is also down below. This has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.